This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Former President Donald Trump and the RNC raked in a massive $141 million haul in May, according to his campaign, which says 25% of donors last month were new. And tens of millions of that came, of course, after his felony conviction last week. Joining us now is our political panel, Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So, Rick, obviously we won't know how this changed votes realistically for sure until November, but we already know how it's changing the movement of money. If 25% of the donors in May were new, that's a pretty good sign for Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's new money coming into your campaign, new donors is a very healthy sign. It shows kind of that voters are looking his way and saying, I'm willing to place a bet. Some donors, they like to go after someone they think is going to win. So there's probably a little bit of the he's going to win and I want to be in. That rhymes. And so I wouldn't discount that, including the big donors, right? So many of these big Republican donors tend to sit on the sidelines so they know who's going to be the nominee or who's going to win the election, and then they start piling on. And I think you're starting to see a real movement in that regard, too. So big numbers for Donald Trump is going to change the narrative certainly this week based on what was a horrific week last week on the legal front.
Big numbers indeed. 141 million for Trump and the RNC, Jeannie, in the month. 52.8 million was the 24-hour period following the verdict. And to Kaylee's point, 25% new donors on the month, 30% were new just in that pocket of time following the verdict. What's the takeaway for Joe Biden here? What's the lesson for the Biden campaign?
Yeah, and those numbers don't even include the soft money, which can potentially be a lot of big money. We do know last week Donald Trump, even the night of the conviction, went out with some big donors for dinner, and he did that every night. So he probably has raked in an enormous amount, more than we even know today. For the Biden campaign, it really means that they have to keep moving along where they were in terms of money. They were doing fairly well with money. This is a race that's going to be fought in these 6 to 7 swing states, so the operation on the ground is critical. They've set up a number of offices. But I think as it pertains to the conviction itself, there's a huge debate in the Democratic Party. How tough should Joe Biden go against Donald Trump on this? And I think you're looking at these numbers in terms of the money. You're looking at the polls, which haven't moved much, at least since the conviction on Thursday night. And I think Joe Biden has to be aggressive, because if he is not, this threatens to get away from them. And so I think they're going to have to ensure that he and his surrogates are aggressive on the fact that Donald Trump is a convicted felon.
So, Jeannie, you speak about debate over this within the Democratic Party. It doesn't seem that there is all too much debate within the Republican Party. Mostly everybody is sticking to the party line about this having been rigged from the start, how this is unfair for former President Donald Trump. Even those who are very on the margins trying to stray away from that, including Larry Hogan, the former governor of Maryland, who's running to flip a blue Senate seat red, who just said, hey, you got to respect the verdict and the way the justice system played out, is now getting kind of villainized by the RNC, or at least the co-chair, Lara Trump. What do you make of that, Jeannie?
Yeah, they are circling the wagons for sure. We've seen it. You know, the Larry Hogan instance was quite remarkable, because the astonishing thing he said, as you just mentioned, was respect the decision, basically. And he was hit back by Lara Trump. He was hit back by Chris Lasavita. I mean, they are clearly trying to make sure that there is no sort of room for any Republican of note to try to criticize Donald Trump on this. So they are clearly circling the wagons, because they know that this is a negative for anybody running for president to be a convicted felon. And they don't have to look far to acknowledge that. 3 days before the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump himself said of Hillary Clinton, a convicted felon running for office or being president will grind this government to a halt. You can't let it happen. Of course, he meant in the case of her, and now the shoe is on the other foot, and they know that as well. So they're trying to ensure that Republicans know they have to stay in line on this.
Well, we've had a couple of interesting, I guess, examples of fallout here. The Lara Trump comment about Larry Hogan is one of them. We're also seeing this manifest itself on Capitol Hill now that lawmakers are coming back. Marjorie Taylor Greene's got this defund New York movement that I'm guessing we shouldn't pay too much attention to, Rick. But Mike Lee has a pretty significant roadblock that he's setting up in the Senate right now. Basically, anything that's coming out of this White House is DOA, including judicial nominations. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, we're showing you that letter that Mike Lee co-signed with some of his colleagues. This is, I guess, maybe a more real side effect of the Trump verdict. But this idea of Republican retribution in Washington equals what in this Congress?
Well, I do think we have to understand that things would be grinding to a halt anyway, right? I mean, this is now an election season. It's official. There's really no must-pass legislation. So everyone's going to be playing these kind of messaging games. And obviously, you know, not letting any further confirmations of federal judges would be standard operating practice. But putting it in the context of, you know, former president was just convicted of 34 felonies is pretty substantial. So, so everything is in that light these days. And so I think it's worth paying attention to. Anybody who thought they were going to try and find something to get done in Congress between now and Election Day, forget about it. Anything that is a roadblock is probably going to be put in the light of, oh, Republicans rallying around Donald Trump. And by the way, Republicans would have expected to rally around Donald Trump. We saw, you know, back in, you know, February of, 23, when the indictments started, that Trump was at his lowest ebb. I mean, he was losing to Ron DeSantis in primary numbers, right, as far as polling goes. And then all of a sudden, one indictment, rally around Donald Trump. Two indictments, rally around Donald Trump. So we've seen this act before. It'll play out the rest of the summer. Summer's kind of the dead spot in primaries right now. And all attention is going to start to focus on this debate at the end of June.
But at the end of the summer, Rick, quickly is September, and September 30th, a funding deadline, a fresh one, considering we just basically figured out 2024, this fiscal year appropriations. Jim Jordan, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, today submitted legislative proposals to defund what he calls lawfare by Jack Smith, Fani Willis, Alvin Bragg, Letitia James. Is this actually going to be the government shutdown battle, is whether or not these special counsels or those looking into Trump can get funded? Is that actually the legislative consequence of all of this?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you're going to anticipate a government shutdown battle because this is a Congress that's going to be very highly politicized. And other than the National Defense Authorization Act that is nicely making its way through the Senate and the House, everything else is basically being put on hold. So it's not like anybody else is rushing to get to a deadline. The Senate and the House have not made a September spending deadline in a decade. So let's not hold our breath and think anything's going to derail that. It's already derailed long before these guys start this process.
Factory is closed. Coming up, a jury is selected in Hunter Biden's gun trial. Just beginning today, Rick and Jeannie will be back with us to talk about the implications next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.